The night Voldemort fell, the wizarding world didn't look toward Godric's Hollow. It looked toward a crooked little house where the windows glowed warm and the garden was full of mud, gnomes, and laughter that should have been harmless. The Burrow. War had made people superstitious. In the last months, the air itself felt like it listened. Even the wind sounded like it carried names. That night, though, the wind changed. It didn't howl, it held its breath. The dark over Devonshire softened, like a fist unclenching. And then the owls came. The first one struck the kitchen window hard enough to rattle the glass. Molly Weasley, half asleep and already irritated by the hour, snatched her wand from the bedside table and stomped downstairs in her slippers, hair in a messy twist, robe tied too tight. Arthur was already there, blinking into the dim candlelight, tugging on his cardigan like it could make him look more awake. He opened the curtain and froze. "Molly," he said quietly, and she knew in that instant it wasn't an ordinary owl. It was a ministry owl. Then another swooped in, and another after it, so fast they clipped each other in the air and tumbled down onto the kitchen table with frantic wings and ink-stained claws. The Burrow had never looked so small. The kitchen, usually safe, felt suddenly exposed, like a stage. Arthur gathered the envelopes with shaking hands. Molly watched his eyes track the words, watched his lips part and fail to make sound. She watched the color drain out of his face so quickly she thought he'd been hexed. "What?" she demanded, already rising. "Arthur, what is it?" Arthur swallowed. His throat moved like it hurt. He held the letter up as if it might bite him. "It says," he began, and then the hearth flared. Not with fire, with presence. The flames climbed the chimney as if they were being pulled by invisible strings, and the air around the fireplace thickened, heavy and charged. The Weasley clock on the wall ticked once, loudly. Then again, its hands jittered like they couldn't decide where to point. A silhouette formed in the light, tall, still, unmistakable. Albus Dumbledore stepped out of the hearth as if he'd simply walked through the night and into their home. His robes smelled faintly of smoke and rain. His beard looked damp at the ends, and his eyes, Molly had seen those eyes in photographs and at ministry meetings, calm and kind and clever. Tonight, they looked old, not tired old, grief old. "Molly," he said. "Arthur." Molly didn't care who he was. She cared about the sound upstairs. A baby's breathing. Too quiet, too steady. "Don't," she snapped, because the way Dumbledore was looking at her was the way people looked at graves. "Don't come in here with that face. What happened?" Dumbledore held her gaze, and she felt something in herself brace, like her spine had decided to become iron. "Voldemort is gone," he said softly. For a second, Molly's body tried to do something stupid like feel relief, like unclench, like believe. It didn't last. Relief was a luxury, and war had trained it out of her like a bad habit. Because peace never arrives gently in wartime. Peace arrives like a trap. Arthur's hands trembled harder. "Gone," he croaked. He's. "The curse rebounded," Dumbledore said, and his voice went quieter still, as if even saying the words might summon something back. "He attempted to kill a child. It failed." Molly's stomach turned cold. "The baby," she said, sharp as a knife. "Which baby?" Dumbledore didn't answer. He didn't need to. Upstairs, there was a small sound, a faint shift in the nursery, like a cradle creaking, like a tiny fist tightening. Molly's whole body snapped into motion. She took the stairs two at a time, heart hammering so hard she tasted metal. She could feel Arthur behind her, stumbling, breath hitching. She could hear Dumbledore's footsteps, uninvited, steady, on the bottom stair, Molly pushed open the nursery door so hard it thudded against the wall. The room was warm, small, smelled of milk and clean laundry and that faint sweet scent babies carry like a spell. The candle on the dresser burned steadily, innocent. Ron was there in his cot, small, red-haired, soft-cheeked, breathing in tiny, even pools like nothing in the world had ever tried to end him. Alive, but with something new carved into his skin. A lightning-shaped scar, raw and bright on his forehead, as if the night itself had struck him and left its signature. Molly froze so abruptly she nearly toppled. It wasn't just a mark. It felt like a claim. Her mother's instincts, older than spells, older than logic, screamed at her that something had touched her child and left a door behind. Arthur made a strangled noise. "Oh, Merlin," he whispered, and the words sounded like prayer and curse in the same breath. Molly moved closer, slowly, as if the air might crack. Her hands hovered over the cot, not touching yet. She watched Ron's chest rise and fall, watched the tiny flutter of his eyelids. He opened his eyes, not baby-wide and unfocused, focused, too aware. His gaze locked on Molly's face like he recognized her, like he'd been waiting to be found. And then, for the first time in his life, Ron Weasley smiled. Every candle flame in the room flickered sideways, not like a draft, like something unseen had inhaled. Molly's skin prickled. Her wand hand tightened. Dumbledore stepped into the nursery doorway and stopped, as if he understood that crossing the threshold felt like stepping into a sacred place. His eyes went to the scar, then to Ron's face, then back to Molly, and she saw it. He wasn't just grieving. He was calculating, measuring, weighing the cost of what had happened and what would happen next. Downstairs, the burrow made a sound, a groan of wood, a subtle shifting like the house was bracing itself. Then voices began to gather outside, fast, urgent, multiplying. Molly could hear them through the walls, as if the house itself had grown thin. Ministry voices, oral voices, the clink of a gate being shoved open, boots on wet grass, someone calling her name like it was public property now. Molly Weasley. Another voice overlapped. "Open up. We need to confirm." A third, sharper. By order of the ministry, Molly didn't blink. She reached into the cot and lifted Ron, pulling him against her chest. He was warm, heavy in that perfect baby way. Real. For half a heartbeat she expected pain, a recoil, something dark. Instead, Ron settled into her like he belonged there, like he always had. Molly tightened her grip until her arms ached. "I'm not handing him over," she said, voice low and flat. Arthur's breath hitched behind her. Molly. She didn't turn. Dumbledore's gaze stayed on her face. He wasn't offended. He wasn't surprised. He looked, if anything, like he'd been waiting for her to say it. "They will demand him," he said. "Let them," Molly replied. Dumbledore's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward the floorboards vibrating faintly with footsteps below. "Molly," he said, very gently, "you must understand. A child who survives Voldemort becomes more than a child in the eyes of the world. They will call him—" "You tell me right now," Molly cut in, and the words came out like a threat, dressed as a question. "Tell me what they're going to call my baby." Dumbledore's eyes returned to the scar again. "They will call him the Chosen One," he said. "They will call him a miracle. They will call him hope." Molly's mouth tightened. "He's my son." Outside, the shouting grew louder. Someone struck the front door with a fist, hard enough to rattle the kitchen shelves. "Molly Weasley, open this door." Arthur took a step toward the nursery like he wanted to shield it with his body. Molly, he pleaded softly. They'll what? Molly hissed. Take him, parade him, put him in a photograph so people can feel brave again, write stories about him until he isn't a person anymore. Her throat tightened, and she hated that it did. Hated the tremble trying to creep into her voice. They can't have him. Downstairs, the Weasley clock shuddered, its hands sliding wildly. Molly imagined it pointing to danger. 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 Dumbledore's voice lowered. If you keep him, they will never stop coming. Molly rocked Ron once, slow and protective, like rocking could reset the world. Let them come, she said. Ron's fingers curled around her collar. His tiny hand, impossibly strong for something so small, tightened like he was anchoring himself to her. Then his scar pulsed. Not heat, not burning, a sharp, cold pinch. Like a needle of ice under the skin. Ron's smile vanished. His eyes squeezed shut. His face twisted in a tiny, soundless grimace, and Molly felt it, sudden and certain, in her bones. This wasn't just a scar left by a curse. It was a connection, a thread, a doorway. Dumbledore noticed, too. His posture changed, subtle but immediate. His hand moved inside his sleeve, as if checking that his wand was there. Arthur whispered, Did it hurt him? Molly didn't answer because she didn't want to speak the possibility into existence. Downstairs, the front door burst open. The sound ripped through the burrow like a crack in ice. Molly. Footsteps thundered across the kitchen. People were inside now. In her home. Men with authority in their voices and fear in their hearts. A woman shouted, Where is the child? Dumbledore stepped forward into the hallway outside the nursery, blocking the view as naturally as if he'd been born to stand between danger and the vulnerable. His voice carried, calm, commanding, and edged with something that made grown auras hesitate. This is a private residence, he said. You will lower your voices. A man barked back. Headmaster, with respect the ministry requires, Dumbledore echoed, and the word turned cold in his mouth. You do not require a mother to surrender her infant, as if he is evidence. Molly could hear them coming up the stairs anyway. The creak of steps under weight, the scrape of boots, the smell of wet wool, and rain, and official certainty creeping into the nursery air. Arthur moved to the door, hands raised, eyes red-rimmed. Please, he said, voice breaking. Please, just... Molly stepped back, deeper into the nursery, clutching Ron. Her wand was in her hand now, too, though she wasn't sure when she'd drawn it. She wasn't a duelist. She wasn't famous. She wasn't a ministry official. But she was a mother. And mothers, she realized with a kind of feral clarity, were older than laws. The first Auror reached the top step. He paused when he saw Dumbledore. Then his gaze slid past him, trying to peer around, trying to see the prize. His eyes landed on Molly for a fraction of a second, and she watched his expression change. Not to kindness, to awe, like he'd already stopped seeing her as a person, like he'd started seeing her as the keeper of something sacred and dangerous. Mrs. Weasley, he said carefully, we need to confirm the child's identity. Molly stared at him. Ron let out a tiny sound, a soft baby noise, and Molly's grip tightened reflexively. The Aura's eyes flicked to the scar. He swallowed. It's him, he breathed. Behind him, another voice, eager, hungry, said, Get a photo. A third, trembling, said, Merlin, help us. Molly's stomach twisted. They weren't here to help her. They were here to help themselves feel safer. Dumbledore's voice sharpened. No photographs. The Auror hesitated. Sir, I said no. Dumbledore repeated, and the air seemed to respond to him, settling heavy. A thin man in ministry robes pushed forward, cheeks flushed with importance. Albus, this is bigger than you. This is bigger than all of us. The public needs reassurance. We need to show them. Molly snapped. He is not a show. The thin man blinked, surprised a woman in an old robe had spoken at all. Then he smiled, as if indulging her. Of course, Mrs. Weasley. Of course. But you must understand, the boy has a responsibility now. Molly's vision went hot. A responsibility? She repeated. He can't even hold his own head up. The man's smile tightened. Destiny doesn't wait for children to grow, he said, as if that was wisdom. Dumbledore's voice went dangerously quiet. Watch your words. The man lifted his hands. We are all grateful, Headmaster. Truly. But we have protocols. The child must be placed somewhere safe, somewhere secure, somewhere appropriate. Molly's heart hammered. She heard the word for what it really was. Somewhere controllable. She didn't realize she was moving until she was already at the window, pulling the curtain aside with her elbow. Outside, her garden was full of shadows. Not Death Eaters. Not tonight. But people. More and more people arriving at the edge of the property, drawn by rumor like moths to a flame. Shapes behind the fence, craning to see. A man lifting something like a camera. A woman clasping her hands as if praying. The world was gathering. Her baby was turning into a spectacle in real time. Molly, Arthur whispered behind her, voice cracked. What do we do? Molly looked down at Ron. His eyes were half open now, drowsy again, innocent again, just a baby. And then, impossibly, he looked straight at her. Not at her face, at her thoughts. It was the strangest feeling, like the air between them thinned, and Molly felt something press against the inside of her mind, faint as a fingertip. Not a voice, not words, a feeling. Hungry, curious, as if something deep inside her son was awake and listening. Molly's breath caught. Dumbledore saw it. He stepped closer, his expression changing, alarm flickering under control. Molly, he said softly, has his scar hurt him before? Molly shook her head, barely able to swallow. No. The Auror leaned in, eager. Sir, what does that mean? Dumbledore's gaze never left Ron's face. It means, he said carefully, that what happened tonight may not be finished. The ministry man stiffened. Are you saying you know who? Do not, Molly snapped, and her voice could have cut glass. Do not speak that name in my son's room. Silence. A baby stirred, and then, from downstairs, a new sound. A crack. Not wood. Magic. Someone had apparated inside the Burrow's wards, which should have been impossible. Arthur's eyes went wide. That's not. Dumbledore's hand moved to his wand. The auras drew theirs. Molly's grip tightened until Ron made a tiny noise of protest. A presence rose in the house, like smoke creeping under doors. Not a person you could see. Not footsteps. Something colder. Something that didn't belong in a kitchen or a nursery. The candle flame shrank. The room dimmed. And Ron's scar pulsed again. Harder this time. So sharply Ron let out a cry. Thin and sudden. The first real cry Molly had ever heard from him. It wasn't a hungry cry. It wasn't a tired cry. It was pain. And it was fear. Molly's whole body reacted. She held him tighter, whispering nonsense comfort, the way mothers did when words failed. It's all right, love. It's all right. Mum's got you. Mum's got you. But the air didn't ease. It tightened. The ministry man backed up a step, face pale now. What is that? He whispered. Dumbledore's voice was low and razor-focused. Leave. All of you. Now. The Auror protested automatically. Sir, we can't. Dumbledore's eyes flashed. Now. Something in his tone made them obey. Not respect, not loyalty. Instinct. Auras started retreating down the stairs, glancing over their shoulders like they feared being followed. The thin ministry man lingered, pride fighting terror. You can't keep him here, he insisted weakly. He is a child, Molly said, and her voice was deadly calm. And you are done standing in my home telling me who he belongs to. The man opened his mouth, and then the house made a sound like a sigh. The Weasley clock's hands all snapped to one word at the same time. Mortal peril. Every hand, every name, even the ones that weren't home. Even Harry Potter's, though he was nowhere near the Burrow and Molly didn't yet know why the clock had a hand for him at all. Arthur stared at the clock, horror crawling over his face. Molly, he breathed. It's everyone. The nursery window pane frosted at the edges, as if the night had pressed its face against the glass. Ron's cry dwindled to a whimper. Molly felt that hungry pressure again, faint against her thoughts. Not Ron. Not a baby. Something using the connection in his scar like a finger testing a lock. And in that moment, Molly understood with awful clarity why people called it a lightning bolt. Because lightning wasn't just a mark. Lightning was a strike from the sky. A message. A warning. Dumbledore stepped in close. Voice so quiet Molly barely heard it over Ron's breathing. They can't take him, he said. Not tonight. Not while that connection is active. Molly's throat tightened. What is it? Dumbledore hesitated, and Molly hated that he hesitated. Then he said, a remnant of Voldemort, Dumbledore clarified. A piece of him that did not die cleanly. He may be gone, but something of him remains. Tethered to my baby, Molly whispered, and the words tasted like ash. Dumbledore didn't deny it. The house creaked again. From somewhere downstairs, a cupboard door swung open on its own, with a soft thunk. Arthur flinched. Dumbledore's wand was up now, pointed toward the doorway, as if the darkness might walk in like a visitor. Molly didn't lower hers either. Outside, the crowd pressed closer against the fence, voices rising with excitement and fear, like the rumor of the chosen one had already become a feast. And Molly Weasley, standing in her nursery, with her baby in her arms, realized the cruelest truth of all. The world would never let Ron Weasley be ordinary again. Not after tonight. Not after surviving. Not after being claimed by a story that didn't care whether it crushed him. Downstairs, someone shouted, "Show him. Let us see him." Another voice yelled, "We need hope. Hope." Like Ron was a candle they wanted to hold over their heads. Molly's jaw tightened until it ached. Hope was not something you took from a child. Hope was something you protected. Dumbledore turned slightly, watching her, as if making a decision. I can hide him, he said quietly. Molly's stomach dropped. No, she said immediately. No, you won't take him from me. Dumbledore didn't argue. He only nodded, slowly, as if he respected the violence in her refusal. Then we must make this home a fortress, he said. Arthur swallowed. How? Dumbledore's gaze flicked to Ron's scar again, then to Molly's arms wrapped around him, then to the door where the world waited, eager and unkind. With love, Dumbledore said softly. With wards, with secrecy, with everything we have. Molly's eyes burned. Then do it, she said. Dumbledore lifted his wand. The air in the nursery shifted, as if the house leaned in to listen. Outside, the crowd shouted again, closer now, and Ron's scar pulsed a third time. This time, Molly felt it differently, not just pain, Recognition, like something out there had turned its head, like something far away had felt the tug of a thread, and smiled. Molly held her baby tighter and whispered into his hair a fierce promise spoken like a spell. "I don't care what they call you," she said. "I don't care what they write. You are mine, and I will fight the whole world before I let it swallow you." Downstairs, the Burrow's walls hummed as Dumbledore began weaving protective magic into old wood and crooked nails, into mismatched bricks and patched roof tiles. The house didn't become pretty. It became stubborn, the way Weasleys were. But even as the wards rose, even as the air grew thicker with protection, Molly couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the night. It was the beginning, because Voldemort was gone, but the darkness he left behind had found a place to cling, and it was clinging to her son. By the time Ron turned 11, he could predict the rhythm of his own life, the way other kids learned to predict weather. Inside the burrow, he was Ron. He was the kid who got mud on the kitchen floor, who lost his shoes under the couch, who laughed too loud at Fred and George's jokes, and then immediately regretted it when Molly's eyes snapped toward him. He was the kid who got scolded for leaving his socks in the living room, and who got hugged so hard his ribs ached when Molly thought no one was looking. Outside the burrow, he became something else. A symbol, a headline, a miracle people used like a blanket. Ron learned early that the world didn't look at him like a child. It looked at him like a promise. And promises are heavy. It started with small things that shouldn't have mattered but did. The way adults' voices changed when they said his name. The way strangers leaned down and stared at his scar like it was a window into their future. The way shopkeepers in Diagon Alley tried to give him free sweets and free robes and free broom polish, smiling too brightly, as if kindness could purchase a piece of him. The way people asked him questions like he was a veteran instead of a boy. Did you see anything? Do you remember? How did it feel? Do you think he'll come back? Ron didn't remember anything. That was the part nobody wanted to accept. They wanted a story, a scene, a dramatic moment. They wanted him to say, "I felt love," or "I felt power," or "I felt destiny." But Ron was a baby, and whatever had happened that night had happened to his body, not his memory. All he remembered was the feeling that never truly left. Sometimes, when the air turned cold, his scar would ache like something was tugging on it from far away, like a hook, like a line, like something still had a hand on him. Molly tried to keep it ordinary. She tried so hard. She banned the Daily Prophet from the house. She sent back gifts without opening them. She chased away reporters with a fury that made grown witches stumble backward and apologize. When Ron was 9, a man actually tried to apparate into the Burrow's garden, and the ward's Dumbledore had woven into the place snapped like a trap. The man appeared halfway through the chicken coop and ended up screaming while chickens flapped around his head like outraged bats. Fred and George thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Molly did not. Arthur tried to make it a joke too, because that's what Arthur did when he didn't know how else to cope. "Well, at least we know the wards work," he said with a weak laugh. Molly stared at the mangled chicken coop and said, "They will keep coming." Ron heard her. He always heard her. He pretended he didn't. He pretended a lot of things. The scariest thing about being the chosen one wasn't the fear of Voldemort coming back. It was the fear of disappointing people if he did. Because Ron began to understand, in quiet moments, that the wizarding world wasn't cheering for him because they cared about him. They were cheering because they needed someone to carry their terror for them. And if he dropped it, if he cracked, if he wasn't brave enough or strong enough or special enough, they would all turn and look at him like he'd betrayed them. That was what made Hogwarts sound less like a dream and more like a trial. Ron tried to be excited anyway. He tried, Because his brothers had told him Hogwarts was the best place on earth. He tried because Ginny looked at him like he was magic itself, and he loved her too much to let her see his fear. But the night before the Hogwarts Express, Ron lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the Burrow creak and settle, and his scar throbbed faintly, like it was remembering something his mind refused to touch. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Molly. She pushed the door open carefully, as if she thought noise might shatter him. Ron sat up quickly, wiping his face even though he hadn't been crying. He couldn't afford to cry, not where she might see. Molly stood in the doorway holding a folded jumper. It was maroon. It had a golden R stitched into the front. Ron's stomach sank. "Mum, I know," Molly said quickly, as if she could read the complaint on his tongue. "I know you hate them, but it'll keep you warm and it's like wearing a sign that says, 'Hello, please stare at me,'" Ron muttered. Molly's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed soft. "They will stare anyway." Ron didn't answer. Molly crossed the room and sat on the edge of his bed. For a moment, she didn't put the jumper in his lap. She just held it, fingers tightening around the wool like she wanted to wring the world's throat. "You don't have to be what they want," she said, very quietly. Ron's throat tightened. "Yes, I do." Molly's gaze snapped to his face. "Ronald." He swallowed hard. "That's what everyone says, that I'm hope, that I'm supposed to do something." Molly reached up and brushed his hair away from his scar with trembling fingers, the way she always did when she thought he wasn't looking. "You're supposed to learn," she said. "You're supposed to make friends and eat too much at feasts and hate homework and complain about the stairs And what if he comes back?" Ron whispered. Molly's hand froze. Silence thickened. Then she forced her fingers to move again, gentle as breathing. "Then we fight," she said. "And we don't ask you to do it alone." Ron stared at her. He wanted to believe her, but he'd already seen the way adults looked at him. He'd already seen the way even his brothers sometimes fell quiet when his scar hurt, as if they were waiting for him to say something heroic. He'd already seen Dumbledore visit the Burrow in the middle of the night more times than he could count, standing in the kitchen, speaking in low voices about safety and prophecy and dark remnants and things that made Molly's shoulders tense, like she was preparing to bite. Molly leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his for a brief moment, fierce and warm. "You're my son," she whispered. "Not theirs." Ron blinked hard. Molly stood, placed the jumper in his lap, and left the room. Ron didn't put it on. Not yet. He just held it and stared at the stitched R like it was a chain and a comfort at the same time. The next morning, the Burrow was chaos. It was always chaos when the Weasleys traveled. Like the house itself panicked at the thought of its people leaving. Percy lectured about punctuality. Fred and George argued about which of them had hidden Ginny's shoes. Bill and Charlie, home for the summer, tried to help by making jokes, and only made things worse. Arthur carried trunks, sweating and smiling too brightly. Everyone got their tickets. Everyone got their... Molly, where's my... Arthur, if you ask me where your wand is one more time, I will hex it into your sock drawer, and you can keep it there forever. All right, Arthur said quickly. Ron stood in the kitchen doorway, with his trunk beside him, watching his family swirl around him like a storm. This was what he loved. This was what terrified him. Because when he left, the storm didn't go with him. The world did. On the way to King's Cross, Molly sat beside Ron in the back seat, her hand resting on his knee like she needed to feel him there. Every time the car slowed, she glanced out the window as if expecting someone to appear and take him. Arthur tried to lighten the mood with a joke about muggles and trains. Fred and George kept making comments about Ron's scar like it was a cool battle mark, and Ron knew they didn't mean harm, but it still made his stomach twist. Ginny kept staring at him as if she might not get another chance. At the station, everything hit at once. The smell of smoke and iron and crowded muggle bodies. The noise, the crush, and threaded through it like poison, the wizarding attention. It wasn't supposed to be there. Not in a muggle place. Not openly. But secrecy melted around Ron like wax. He saw it as soon as they stepped onto the platform. People who didn't belong. A witch in a neat coat, pretending to read a newspaper upside down. A man in robes, disguised badly under a trench coat. Eyes flicking constantly. Two teenagers near the edge of the crowd, whispering and pointing, pretending they weren't. Ron's scar twinged. He gripped his trunk handle harder. "Mum," he muttered. "I see them," Molly said under her breath, and her voice was calm, but her fingers tightened on his shoulder like claws. They moved towards the barrier. That's when the first person approached. A man with slick hair, smiling too much. He held up a camera. "Mr. Weasley," he said eagerly, as if Ron were a minister instead of a kid. "Just one picture for the prophet. The public's been waiting to see you go to Hogwarts. It'll make them feel—" Ron stared at him. Feel what? Safer? Less afraid? Like the war hadn't happened, like they could put their fear on an 11-year-old's shoulders and call it hope. Ron didn't speak. Molly did. "No," she said flatly. The man blinked. "Mrs. Weasley, surely." "I said no." He tried again anyway, because people like that always did. "It would be inspirational," he insisted. "The boy who lived going to school. It's history." Ron felt something rise in his throat, hot and bitter. He hated that phrase, boy who lived. It sounded like a statue. It sounded like a story without blood in it. He stepped forward and said, "Stop calling me that." The man's smile faltered. "I'm sorry." "What?" Ron's voice shook, but he forced it steady. "Stop calling me that. My name is Ron." The man stared, confused, as if Ron had broken a rule he didn't know existed. Then the man laughed awkwardly. Of course, Ron. Just a quick photo." Then Molly raised her wand so casually it was terrifying. "Move." The man moved. More people watched. Ron could feel their eyes like hands on his skin. He forced himself to walk to the barrier, but just before he followed his family through, Ron's gaze snagged on someone else. A boy standing alone near a pillar. Messy black hair. Too large clothes. A trunk that looked heavy. Eyes scanning the station like he expected to be shouted at for being in the wrong place. Harry Potter. In this world, Harry wasn't surrounded. He wasn't a legend. He wasn't a headline. He was just a kid who looked like he had learned to be small to survive. Something in Ron's chest tightened. Ron knew that look. He'd seen it in kids at the edge of charity events, in children who flinched when adults raised their voices. He'd seen it in people who didn't expect kindness to be offered because it usually came with conditions. Ron had grown up famous. Harry looked like he'd grown up invisible. Ron didn't know why that made him angry, but it did. Maybe because invisibility felt cruel in a world that wouldn't stop staring at Ron. Maybe because part of Ron wanted to trade. Ron slipped out of Molly's grip and walked over. "Hey," Ron said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant. Harry flinched like he'd been struck. Then he looked up, and his eyes widened slightly, not with awe, more with uncertainty. You're Ron Weasley," Harry said, like he'd heard the name too many times, but didn't know what to do with it in real life. Ron shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. "Yeah, you want to come with us?" Before my mum decides we all need to be in the same carriage forever. Harry blinked. With you? With us? Ron repeated, and he hated how the question had made him feel like a walking invitation, like people only approached him because of what he represented. But this felt different. Harry wasn't looking at the scar. Harry was looking at Ron's face. Harry hesitated, and Ron saw the calculation. Is this a trap? Is this real? Will it cost me something? Then Harry nodded once. Okay. Ron turned back toward the barrier and shouted, Mum, can he come too? Molly's head snapped around. She took in Harry in a single sharp glance. The two big clothes, the guarded posture, the way he held his trunk handle like someone might steal it. Something changed in her expression, softening, like a muscle unclenching. Of course, dear, she said, and there was a warmth in her voice that made Harry's shoulders drop a fraction. Ron watched that and felt something twist inside him. He didn't know what it was yet. Not jealousy, not exactly. More like fear. Because Harry had just been welcomed into Ron's family without conditions. And Ron realized, with a sudden ache, that no one had ever welcomed Ron into the world the same way. They had welcomed the scar. They had welcomed the promise. Not him. They crossed the barrier. Platform 9 3/4 unfolded like a secret made real. Scarlet train, steam, owls, witches, and wizards shouting goodbyes. For a few heartbeats, Ron almost felt normal. Then the whispers began again. He heard his name like wind. He heard the phrase, boy who lived again. Softer now, reverent. He saw people point. He saw someone lift a camera again. Molly's wand hand twitched. Arthur leaned down and whispered, Ignore them, Ron. Ron nodded, but ignoring eyes didn't make them stop. It just meant you carried them inside your skin instead. They boarded the train. Ron helped Harry drag his trunk, though Harry insisted he could do it. Ron insisted harder. It felt good to do something ordinary. Lift, pull, shove, complain about the weight. It felt good to be useful without being worshipped. They found an empty compartment. As soon as they sat, Ron realized the train noise outside muffled, the platform whispers. He exhaled like he hadn't breathed properly in years. Harry sat opposite him, posture careful, as if he didn't know if he was allowed to relax. Ron offered him a chocolate frog without thinking, because offering food was what Weasleys did, and Harry took it like it might disappear if he moved too fast. The door slid open. A girl with bushy brown hair and a look like she'd swallowed a library stepped in. Excuse me, she said briskly. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. Ron blinked. No. The girl's eyes flicked over them. Then they landed on Ron's forehead. Her whole face shifted, not into cruelty, into excitement. The kind of excitement Ron had learned to dread. Oh, she breathed. You're him. Ron's stomach sank. He began. You're Ron Weasley, she said quickly, and she sounded pleased with herself, like she'd just matched a picture to a real object. The chosen one. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you, of course. I'm from a Muggle family, but I learned very quickly, and Ron felt his throat tighten. Harry watched silently, eyes sharp. Hermione stepped closer, peering like she might see destiny lodged in Ron's pupils. Is it true you survived because your mother's love protected you? There are 3 different accounts, and one says Ron snapped before he could stop himself. Do you ever stop talking? The compartment went silent. Hermione blinked, as if no one had ever told her to shut up in her life. Ron's ears burned. He hated that he'd been rude, but he hated more that her excitement made him feel like a museum display. Harry didn't look away. He was studying Ron like he was learning something. Hermione's cheeks went red. "I'm sorry," she said stiffly. "I only meant, people say you're very brave." Ron laughed, sharp and humorless. "People say lots of things." Hermione stiffened. "Well, you don't have to be ungrateful." Ungrateful. Ron felt something snap. "I didn't ask for it," he said, voice low. "I didn't ask to be anything." Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it, caught off guard by the rawness in his tone. Harry finally spoke. "He's right," he said quietly. Hermione turned toward Harry, frowning like she'd forgotten he existed. "And you are?" "Harry," he said. Hermione blinked. "Harry who?" Harry's mouth tightened. "Just Harry." Ron felt something twist again. Just Harry. No headlines. No worship. No expectation. Ron didn't know whether to envy him or protect him. Hermione adjusted her posture like she was regaining control. "Fine," she said. "Well, if you want to succeed at Hogwarts, it helps to know things. I've memorized most of our textbooks and—" Ron groaned. "Merlin's sake." Hermione huffed and left. As soon as the door shut, Ron slumped back, rubbing his forehead as if he could rub the scar off. Harry watched him for a moment. Then Harry said softly, "She wasn't trying to be mean." Ron snorted. "I know." Silence stretched. Then Harry added, "Does it bother you? People staring." Ron looked at him. Harry's eyes were calm, but there was something underneath, something sharp. Understanding. Ron realized Harry might not be famous, but he knew what it felt like to be watched, too. Watched by people who didn't like you. Watched by people who wanted you to be small. Ron swallowed. "Yeah," he admitted. "It bothers me." Harry nodded like that was the most normal thing in the world. And something in Ron's chest loosened. Maybe because Harry didn't tell him to be grateful. Maybe because Harry didn't look at him like a promise. Maybe because Harry was the first person Ron had met who treated him like he was allowed to be annoyed. The trolley witch came by. Ron bought too many sweets because comfort tasted like sugar. He shoved half of them toward Harry. Harry hesitated, then accepted, and Ron watched him eat like someone who wasn't used to being full. For a while, they talked about normal things. Hogwarts houses. Quidditch. Which subjects sounded horrible? Ron found himself laughing. He found himself forgetting the scar. It was the closest thing to peace he'd had in years. Then the door slid open again. Hermione returned, but she wasn't alone. A round-faced boy stood behind her, teary and desperate. "I've lost Trevor," the boy whimpered. Hermione said, "We're searching every compartment." Ron sighed. "We told you we haven't seen a toad." But Hermione wasn't looking at Ron this time. She was looking at Harry, her eyes narrowed, thoughtful now, like she'd finally actually seen him. "You said your name was Harry," she said slowly. Harry stiffened. "Yes." Hermione's gaze flicked to his face, then to his hair, then to the faint shadow under his eyes. "Harry Potter?" she asked, suddenly unsure. Harry's jaw tightened. "Yes." The round-faced boy gasped softly, like he'd just discovered a second legend. Hermione stared. Then she looked back at Ron, confused. But everyone said. Ron felt the familiar bitterness rise. Everyone said. Everyone assumed. Everyone wrote stories and forgot the people inside them. "He's Harry Potter," Ron said flatly. "So what?" Hermione looked stunned. "But he's not." "Chosen," Ron finished for her, voice sharp. "No, he's not. So stop doing that. Stop looking at us like we're puzzles." Hermione's cheeks flushed again. Harry's eyes flicked toward Ron. Surprised. Ron realized he'd said it with protectiveness, not anger. Protectiveness for Harry. because Harry was about to get dragged into the same machine that had chewed Ron up, and Ron couldn't stand the thought of it. Hermione swallowed. "I'm sorry," she said again, softer this time. I didn't realize." "Most people don't," Ron muttered. The train rattled on. Outside, the countryside blurred, and somewhere between sweets and awkward apologies, something fragile began forming in that compartment. Not destiny, not prophecy, friendship. But destiny wasn't done with Ron Weasley. It never was. When the sun began to dip, the compartment temperature dropped suddenly. Not because of weather, because of something else. Ron's scar twitched. He froze. Harry noticed instantly. "What's wrong?" Ron's hand went to his forehead without thinking. Nothing. It wasn't nothing. The ache was faint, but it was familiar, that icy pinch like a hook tugging from far away. Hermione's eyes widened. "Is your scar?" "Don't," Ron snapped. The door slid open, without anyone touching it. A shadow filled the doorway. Tall, thin, a boy with pale hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Draco Malfoy. He stepped in like he owned the compartment, like the train was built for him. His gaze went straight to Ron's forehead. Then he smiled wider. "Well," Draco drawled, voice smooth as poison. "Look at that. The Weasley miracle." Draco's eyes flicked to Harry, then away like Harry was furniture. "And you," Draco said to Ron, "are supposed to save us all." Ron's wand hand twitched, though he didn't draw it. Draco leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "My father says it's only a matter of time before the world realizes something," Draco whispered. Ron stared at him. "What?" Draco's smile sharpened. "That you didn't win," he said. "You just survived. There's a difference." Ron felt cold spread through his chest. Draco tilted his head, almost curious. "Tell me, Weasley, does it hurt? Does it remind you?" Ron's scar pulsed once. "Harder," like it reacted to Draco's words. Ron's vision flashed white for half a second. Not pain, not fire, a glimpse, a corridor, a hiss, a laugh that wasn't human. Ron staggered slightly, catching himself on the seat. Harry was on his feet instantly. "Ron?" Draco watched with bright, hungry interest. "Ah," Draco breathed. "So it does." Hermione stood too, voice shaking but firm. "Get out." Draco ignored her. He kept his gaze on Ron. "My father says the Dark Lord isn't gone," Draco murmured. "Not really. He says you're proof he can come back. Because if a curse can leave a mark," Draco's smile widened, cruel and delighted, "it can leave a door." Ron's blood turned to ice. Because Draco wasn't just taunting. He was echoing the fear Ron had never said out loud. Draco stepped back, satisfied, and slid the compartment door shut behind him with a soft click. The air warmed again, as if the cold had been carried in with him and taken away. Ron's scar stopped pulsing, but the feeling remained. Door, thread, hook. Harry stared at Ron, worried and angry. What did he mean? Ron swallowed hard. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say nothing. It was just Malfoy being Malfoy. But his scar still felt wrong, and he couldn't shake the image that had flashed behind his eyes. A corridor, a hiss, a laugh. Like something inside him remembered something his mind didn't. Ron forced himself to breathe. "I don't know," he said. Hermione looked pale. He said, "A door." Ron didn't answer. Because if he spoke the fear, it would become real. The train whistled, long and mournful, as it began to slow. Night pressed against the windows, and Ron realized, with a sinking certainty, that Hogwarts wasn't going to be an escape. It was going to be a stage. And someone out there, someone who had once tried to kill him, was still watching the Chosen One grow up. Hogwarts always looked bigger in real life than it did in the stories. Ron had heard it described 1,000 ways: magnificent, ancient, magical, home. But none of those words prepared him for the first sight of it rising out of the dark, like a fortress carved from night itself. The boat skimmed across the black lake, lantern light trembling on the water. The castle's windows glowed gold, steady and warm, like it was watching them approach. Ron sat rigid in the boat, hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles hurt. He could feel eyes on him again, even here, even with the wind and the water and the darkness. The Chosen One has arrived. He hated that thought. He hated that even his own brain had started sounding like other people. Harry sat beside him, quiet, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was trying to make himself take up less space. Across the boat, Hermione sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, lips moving silently as she recited something in her head. Ron didn't ask what. He didn't want to know. The moment they stepped into the castle, the air changed. It wasn't just colder. It felt thicker, as if the stone held its own weight differently. The corridors smelled faintly of wax and old books, and something metallic under it all, like history had a taste. Professor McGonagall waited in the entrance hall, sharp as a blade in tartan. Her eyes swept over the first years, pausing, just for a fraction, on Ron's scar. Ron felt it like a touch. McGonagall's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, like she'd just remembered what it meant to be responsible for children in a world that wanted to use them. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said crisply. "Before we begin the start of term feast, you will be sorted into your houses." Ron tried to focus on the words, but the whispers were already here. Not students, portraits, faces in frames tilted toward him as the first years passed. Mouths moved, eyes glittered. Some looked curious, some looked reverent, some looked hungry. There was one old wizard portrait near a staircase who leaned forward and murmured, too softly for anyone else to hear, "So it's true." Ron's scar prickled. He jerked his head away. Harry noticed. "What?" Ron shook his head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing, because when Ron glanced back, the old wizard portrait was still watching him with an expression that wasn't awe. It was calculation. They were herded into a small chamber before the great hall. The ceiling felt low, even though it wasn't, as if the castle wanted them to huddle, wanted them to feel small before it judged them. Ron's chest tightened. In his head, he heard his mother's voice. "You don't have to be what they want." Then he heard the world's voice. "Yes, you do." The doors to the great hall swung open. Light and sound hit Ron like a wave. Thousands of candles floated above the tables, their flames steady and bright. The ceiling was an enchanted night sky scattered with stars. The house tables stretched long and crowded, students turning to stare, their faces a wall of curiosity. And when they saw Ron, the hall changed. The murmur rose into a roar. Not cheering, not exactly, more like the sound of people seeing a symbol step into the flesh. Ron's stomach dropped through the floor. He heard the words like wind. "That's him. That's Ron Weasley. That's the scar. That's the one who beat him." Someone actually started clapping at the Ravenclaw table. Others joined in, uncertain, like they were waiting for permission. Ron stood frozen, heart pounding, face hot. McGonagall's voice cut through it like a whip. Silence. The applause died instantly, but the eyes didn't. Ron's scar twitched. He felt Harry's presence beside him, steady, like a hand on his shoulder without touching. Harry didn't look at the crowd. Harry looked at Ron. That helped, a little. They lined up. One by one, names were called. A hat was placed on each head. A shout. A table cheering. When Hermione Granger was called, Hermione stepped forward, chin high, and Ron watched her walk like she was marching into battle. The hat was placed on her head. Ron expected Ravenclaw. Everyone did. The hat barely touched her hair before it shouted, Gryffindor. Hermione looked stunned for half a second. Then she walked toward Gryffindor, like she'd decided to own it. She glanced back once at Ron and Harry, expression fierce like a promise. We're together now, whether you like it or not. Then it was Harry's turn. Harry Potter. A small ripple ran through the room, not reverent, curious, confused, because everyone knew the name, everyone knew his parents, but he wasn't the headline. He stepped forward and sat on the stool. The hat dropped over his eyes. It paused, longer than most. Ron felt the room lean in. Then the hat said, in a voice only Harry could hear, but Ron swore he saw it on Harry's face. Ah, another one. The hat shouted, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table cheered again, louder now, because Gryffindor always cheered, and because Harry Potter was still a name that meant something. Harry sat beside Hermione, looking slightly dazed, like he couldn't decide whether he belonged anywhere. Ron's name was called last, as if the castle wanted the drama. Ronald Weasley. The great hall went so quiet Ron could hear the candles crackle. Every face turned, every eye, every expectation. Ron walked forward like he was walking into a court. He sat on the stool. McGonagall placed the hat on his head. It dropped over his eyes. The world vanished. And then the hat spoke, not aloud, inside his skull. So, the famous one. Ron's heart hammered. He didn't answer, because he didn't know how. The hat continued. Voice low and old and far too knowing. So much noise around you. So much weight. So much fear. Ron swallowed. The hat paused, and then it said something that made Ron's blood go cold. There's something in you. Ron's breath hitched. Not just courage, not just pressure. Something else. The scar pulsed faintly, like it agreed. Ron's hands clenched on the stool. The hat's voice deepened. A door, it murmured. A thread. A remnant reaching for you. Ron's throat went tight. He thought of Draco saying it on the train. He thought of his mother whispering it in fear. Door. Thread. Remnant. The hat hummed thoughtfully. You could do great things, Ronald Weasley, but not if you let the world choose your shape. Ron's eyes burned. He didn't want greatness. He wanted to be a kid. He wanted to be Ron. Where do you want to go? The hat asked softly. Ron's mind flashed images. Gryffindor's cheers. The pressure, the expectation. Slytherin's cold whispers. Ravenclaw's quiet respect. Hufflepuff's warmth. Then he saw his mother's face. Not proud, not awed. Terrified and fierce. And he realized with a sudden clarity that made his chest ache that the only thing he wanted, more than safety, more than fame, more than prophecy, was choice. I want to go where they won't worship me, Ron thought fiercely. I want to go where I can breathe. The hat was silent. Then, very slowly, it said, Interesting. Ron's scar twitched again, as if something unseen in him was annoyed. The hat's voice sharpened. But you also want to fight. You want to prove them wrong. You want to stand tall. Ron didn't deny it. The hat sighed. And then, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, it shouted, Gryffindor! The hall exploded. The Gryffindor table roared like a stadium. People stood. People cheered. People pounded the table. Someone shouted his name like they were chanting in war. Ron stumbled off the stool, ears ringing. He wanted to throw up. Harry caught his elbow and guided him toward the Gryffindor table, and Ron realized he was shaking. Hermione leaned forward, eyes bright. "You're in our house." Ron forced a smile. Inside, he felt like the house had just closed around him like a fist. The feast began. Food appeared in front of them in golden waves. Platters piled high, gravy steaming, bread baskets refilling. The smell was rich and comforting, like it was trying to convince Ron that this was home. Ron ate because eating was something he could control, but the eyes kept sliding toward him, even while people pretended not to stare. They asked him questions between bites. What did it feel like? Do you remember anything? Does the scar hurt? Do you think he'll come back? Ron answered with shrugs and short sentences, letting Harry and Hermione fill the silence with safer topics. After the feast, Percy led them to Gryffindor Tower, lecturing about rules and passwords. The common room was warm, full of chatter and firelight. The older students looked up when Ron entered. Some smiled. Some looked like they were measuring him. Ron sat near the fire, feeling the heat against his face and trying to pretend he didn't want to crawl under the sofa. Hermione asked him about the sorting hat. Eager. Ron lied. It was fine. Harry just sat beside him, silent, like he understood the value of not pushing. That night, in the dormitory, Ron lay awake listening to the other boys breathe. Seamus snored softly. Dean muttered in his sleep. Neville's bed creaked as he shifted, restless. Ron stared up at the canopy. His scar tingled faintly. Not pain, a presence, like something was tapping on the inside of his skull, testing for weakness. Ron squeezed his eyes shut and tried to ignore it. But ignoring it didn't make it stop. The next weeks blurred into classes and corridors, and the slow shock of school life. Professor Snape's eyes lingered on Ron's scar with something like contempt. Professor Flitwick smiled at Ron too brightly, as if trying to reassure the chosen one. Professor Sprout treated Ron like a normal student, and Ron nearly cried in herbology because it felt so rare. Harry was quiet in class but sharp, watching everything. Hermione was relentless, raising her hand so often even the teachers began to sigh before calling on her. And Ron tried to be normal, tried to joke, tried to complain, tried to be just another Gryffindor kid. But it never lasted, because the castle was watching him too. He felt it in the way certain corridors seemed colder when he passed, in the way his scar sometimes prickled near locked doors, in the way the mirrors sometimes showed his reflection a fraction too late. Then Halloween arrived. The great hall was decorated with floating pumpkins the size of boulders. Bats fluttered in enchanted swarms. The air smelled of cinnamon and smoke. Ron tried to enjoy it. For a while, he almost did. He laughed when Fred and George accidentally charmed a pumpkin to belch. He ate too many sweets. He watched Harry's face soften slightly, as if he was allowing himself to belong. Hermione, as usual, corrected everyone about everything. Ron snapped at her about it at dinner. Something small, something stupid. Hermione's face tightened, and she stood abruptly, leaving the table with her eyes shining. Ron watched her go and felt that familiar bitterness rise. Why does she have to be right all the time? He didn't follow. He told himself she'd come back. Then Professor Quirrell burst into the great hall, pale and trembling. "Troll," he gasped, "in the dungeons." Chaos erupted. Students screamed and surged. Teachers shouted orders. Prefects tried to herd first years. Percy grabbed Ron by the arm. "Gryffindors, this way!" Ron followed automatically, heart hammering. But then Harry's head snapped up. "Hermione," Harry said. Ron froze. Hermione was still in the bathroom. alone, with a troll loose. Ron's stomach turned. He looked around, seeing the teachers' backs, the rushing crowd. No one else knew. No one else would go. Harry looked at Ron, eyes wide. We have to. Ron's scar pulsed, a faint, icy pinch, like a warning. For a heartbeat, Ron felt the weight of the Chosen One narrative slam into him. Go save her. Be brave. Be the hero. Ron hated it. Hated the way even danger felt like a script written for him. But Hermione was still a person, not a storyline. Ron grabbed Harry's sleeve. This way, he said, and they slipped out of the crowd. The corridors were empty, echoing with distant screams and footsteps. The castle felt huge and shadowy, like it was holding its breath. Ron's scar prickled again as they ran. They reached the girls' bathroom and heard it. A heavy, dragging sound. A wet snort. A low growl. Harry's face went pale. Ron's mouth went dry. They pushed the door open. The troll was inside. It was enormous, grey skin like stone, club dragging behind it, head turning slowly as if it was trying to remember why it had come. Hermione stood frozen near the sinks, wand in hand, eyes wide with terror. She looked at Ron and Harry like she couldn't believe they were real. "Run!" Harry shouted. Hermione didn't move. The troll turned toward them, slow but inevitable, lifting its club. Time slowed. Ron's scar pulsed hard, ice flooding his skull. Ron's vision flashed white. For half a heartbeat, he saw something else, layered over the bathroom like a memory. A tall figure. A laugh. Green light. Ron staggered. The troll stepped forward. Harry darted to the side, trying to distract it. Hermione finally moved, stumbling backward, but her foot caught, and she fell. The troll raised its club. This was the moment the Chosen One was supposed to rise. The moment the story demanded heroism. Ron's mind screamed, "Do it! Do it! Do it!" Ron's body moved, not because of destiny, because Hermione was going to die. Ron lifted his wand with shaking hands. The spell he needed was a levitation charm. He knew that. Hermione had said it 100 times in class. But Ron's tongue felt thick. His brain felt filled with cold static. He tried anyway. Wingardium. Ron croaked. Nothing. The troll's club descended. Harry shouted Hermione's name. Hermione screamed, and something in Ron snapped. Not into bravery, into rage. A fierce, ugly human rage at the idea that this was what his life was. Danger, death, expectation. He screamed the spell with everything in him. Wingardium Leviosa. The troll's club lifted, not gracefully, violently, like it had been yanked by a giant hand. The club flew upward, smashing into the ceiling, spraying stone dust. The troll blinked, confused. Ron's arms burned. The wand felt like it was vibrating. For a second, it worked. Then Ron's scar flared again. Ice-hot pain, so sharp he nearly dropped his wand. The spell wavered. The club jerked. It swung sideways instead of up. It clipped the troll's own head with a sickening crack. The troll staggered, eyes rolling. Then it collapsed, shaking the floor. Silence. Ron stood frozen, panting, wand still raised, heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. Harry stared at him, stunned. Hermione stared too, face pale, hair wild, eyes shining with shock. Ron's scar throbbed, slow and deep. He lowered his wand and realized his hands were shaking uncontrollably. Then footsteps thundered outside. The door burst open. McGonagall, Snape, Quirrell, and several teachers stormed in, wands drawn. They took in the scene, the unconscious troll, the broken ceiling, 3 first years standing in shock. McGonagall's gaze snapped to Ron's forehead, then to his wand, then to Hermione. "What," she said, voice deadly calm, "are you doing here?" Hermione, still breathing hard, stepped forward before Ron could speak. "I came looking for the troll," she lied, voice shaky but determined. "I thought I could handle it. Harry and Ron came to save me." Ron blinked at her, stunned. Hermione's eyes met his for half a second. There was something new in them. Respect. Not admiration for a legend. Respect for a boy who had done a terrifying thing and looked sick about it. McGonagall's mouth tightened. She scolded them. She took points. She gave points. She did the teacher thing. But when the teachers finally left, when the bathroom was quiet again, Hermione turned to Ron. "You did it," she whispered. Ron swallowed, still shaking. "I almost didn't." Hermione's voice softened. "But you did." Harry stepped closer, eyes bright with something intense. "That wasn't just luck," he said. "You lifted it." Ron's scar pulsed again, faintly, like a reminder. Ron looked away. "It hurt," he admitted, voice low. "When I did it." Hermione frowned. "Your scar?" Ron nodded. Harry's face tightened, like it reacts when you use magic. Ron didn't answer, because he didn't want to admit the worst part. The worst part wasn't the pain. The worst part was the flash he'd seen, the memory that wasn't his. A laugh, green light. A feeling like something inside him had enjoyed the moment he'd lost control. Ron stared down at his wand, and a thought, cold and unwelcome, slid into his mind. What if the Chosen One isn't just a hero? What if he's also a doorway for the thing he supposedly killed? That night, as they walked back to Gryffindor Tower, the castle corridors seemed quieter. Too quiet, as if Hogwarts itself was listening. Ron's scar ached, slow and deep. And for the first time, Ron didn't fear Voldemort coming back someday. He feared something worse, that Voldemort had never fully left. That part of him was already here, already inside the Chosen One's skin. After the troll, the castle didn't feel safer. It felt awake. Ron tried to convince himself he was imagining it, tried to tell himself that nearly dying in a bathroom would make anyone jumpy. But there were little things, small enough to deny, that kept happening around him, like the castle was testing a string tied to his scar. A corridor that was always warm would turn cold when he stepped into it, like the air itself pulled back. A suit of armor would turn its head when he passed, metal creaking softly in a way it never did for anyone else. A portrait would pause mid-argument and glance at him, eyes narrowing, as if it had suddenly remembered an old name. And always, the scar. It didn't burn the way stories claimed it did for Harry Potter in other worlds. It didn't feel like fire. It felt like ice pressed into skin. A pinch, a tug, a hook that tightened whenever Ron got close to something locked. It started with the third-floor corridor. Everyone knew about it by then, because Hogwarts students spread rules like they were dares. The corridor was forbidden, which made it irresistible. Fred and George told Ron, grinning, that it was probably full of treasure, or dragons, or the headmaster's secret biscuits stash. Ron laughed like he believed them. He didn't. He'd seen the way teachers went tense when someone even mentioned that corridor. He'd seen Snape's eyes flick toward it, like a man checking the position of a knife. One night, late in November, Ron woke up to the sound of someone whispering in the dormitory. He sat upright, heart racing. The other boys were asleep. Seamus snored. Dean mumbled. Neville whimpered quietly like he was having a nightmare. The whisper wasn't in the room. It was inside Ron's skull. Not words exactly. A sensation like someone humming in the back of his mind, coaxing. Come closer. Ron's scar tingled. He pressed his fingers to it, trying to ground himself. The whispering intensified, like a thread being pulled. Ron swung his legs out of bed, bare feet touching cold stone. He didn't decide to get up. His body simply moved, like a sleepwalker. A door creaked. Ron froze, blinking. Harry was sitting up in his bed too, eyes alert. He whispered, "Ron." Ron swallowed. I don't know." Harry climbed out of bed without hesitation, bare feet, silent on the floor. Then, a moment later, Hermione's voice hissed from the darkness near the door. "You're both idiots," she whispered, stepping out from behind a hanging cloak like she'd been waiting for them to do something stupid. Ron stared. "Were you?" "I heard you," Hermione snapped. "Or I heard something." Her eyes flicked to Ron's forehead. "Is it doing that thing again?" Ron didn't answer, because he didn't want to give the scar more attention than it already demanded. But yes, it was doing the thing. The hook. The tug. They crept out of the dormitory with the stealth of children who'd never truly been stealthy, but had enough adrenaline to compensate. The castle at night felt different. Corridors stretched, like they had more shadow in them, and the torches seemed to burn lower, their flames less confident. They moved through hallways, down staircases, past sleeping portraits. Ron's scar pulled him like a compass. He hated that part most, how it felt less like a symptom and more like direction. Harry walked slightly ahead, scanning corners, eyes sharp. Hermione trailed behind, wand in hand, whispering small protective spells under her breath. Ron followed the tug. It led them to the third-floor corridor, the Forbidden Corridor. The air there was colder than the rest of the castle, as if winter had pooled behind the door. Ron's scar pinched hard. His breath caught. Harry reached for the handle. Hermione grabbed his wrist. "We shouldn't." Harry looked back at Ron's face. Ron didn't know what expression he was wearing, but Harry's eyes hardened like he'd already decided. "We have to know," Harry whispered. Hermione's fingers tightened. "Or we could just not die." Ron's scar pulsed, a faint, eager thrum, like the thing inside him approved of the idea of danger. Ron swallowed, forcing himself to speak. "It's pulling me." Hermione went pale. "Pulling you to a forbidden corridor is not a good sign." Harry exhaled slowly. "Then we don't let it pull you alone." Before Hermione could protest again, Harry turned the handle. The door opened. The smell hit first. Warm, wet dog breath. Then the sound. A deep, vibrating growl that shook the air. They saw it in the dim torchlight. A massive three-headed dog, each head glaring, teeth bared, saliva dripping. Ron's stomach dropped. Hermione made a strangled sound. Harry stepped back instantly, pulling the door closed so fast it nearly slammed. Silence returned, but their hearts didn't. They stumbled away down the corridor, breathless, eyes wide. Hermione whispered, "That's not normal." Ron barked out a laugh that sounded like he might be sick. "No, Hermione, it's not normal." Harry's face was pale but focused. "There's something in there." Ron's scar throbbed like a bruise. He pressed his fingers to it and felt the tug still pointing behind that door, like whatever it wanted was under the dog. Hermione's eyes were wide with fear and fury. "Why would your scar pull you toward a monster guarding a forbidden corridor?" Ron didn't answer, because he didn't know. Because he didn't want to admit the thought that had been sitting in his stomach like poison since Malfoy said the word door. They returned to the common room in silence. Ron couldn't sleep afterward. He lay in bed, staring at the canopy, listening to the castle creak. He thought about the three-headed dog. He thought about the way the corridor felt like winter. He thought about the way his scar tugged toward it like a leash. And he thought about Voldemort, the man everyone insisted was gone. Gone, but not cleanly. Gone, but leaving something behind. A remnant. A thread. A hook. Days passed. December came. Snow piled against the castle windows. Students grew excited about Christmas. The halls filled with decorations, and the great hall sprouted trees glittering with enchanted frost. Ron should have felt cozy. He didn't. His scar tugged more often now, not always toward the corridor, but toward the teacher's wing, toward the restricted section, toward places Ron knew held secrets. Hermione began watching him more closely, not like a fan, like a doctor watching symptoms. Harry began staying closer too, not because he wanted fame, but because he'd quietly made a decision that Ron wasn't allowed to be alone when the scar acted up. Ron resented it and loved it at the same time. Christmas approached. Most students left. The castle emptied, becoming quieter in a way that felt wrong, like the walls could finally speak when there weren't enough kids to drown them out. Ron stayed. So did Harry. Hermione stayed too, claiming she wanted to study, but Ron knew she stayed because she didn't trust him not to get himself killed. On Christmas morning, the three of them sat by the fire in the common room, tearing open presents with forced cheer. Ron got a new jumper from Molly, maroon again, the golden R stitched even bigger this time. He rolled his eyes and put it on anyway because Molly would know if he didn't, somehow. Harry got a hand-knit jumper too, green with an H. And Harry stared at it, like he didn't know what to do with something made just for him. He ran his fingers over the stitching like it was fragile. Hermione got books, of course. Ron got her a chocolate frog, and she acted like it was a rare artifact. For a few hours, it felt almost normal. Then the door to Gryffindor Tower opened. Professor McGonagall entered with Dumbledore. Ron's stomach tightened instantly. Dumbledore looked calm, but Ron saw the way his eyes flicked to Ron's forehead, like he was checking a wound. "Mr. Weasley," Dumbledore said, voice gentle. "Would you come with us, please?" Ron's mouth went dry. "Why?" Dumbledore's gaze shifted briefly to Harry and Hermione, who both looked alarmed now. "A precaution," Dumbledore said. "Nothing more." Hermione stood. "Professor Watt," McGonagall's voice cut in. "Miss Granger, you will remain here." Harry stepped forward, jaw tight. "Where are you taking him?" Dumbledore's eyes softened. "Somewhere safe." Ron hated that word now. Safe meant controlled. Safe meant away from his mother. Safe meant people making decisions about his body like it was a tool. Ron stood, hands trembling slightly, trying to hide it. Harry's hand shot out and grabbed his sleeve. Ron looked at him. Harry's eyes were intense. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't go. Don't let them take you." Ron swallowed. "I have to." Harry's grip tightened for a second, then released reluctantly. Ron followed Dumbledore and McGonagall through the corridors. The castle felt emptier than ever. They walked past sleeping portraits, past silent suits of armor, down staircases that creaked like they were complaining. Ron's scar began to throb as they descended toward the lower floors. The tug intensified. Ron swallowed hard. It was pulling him somewhere. Dumbledore led him not toward the third-floor corridor, but toward a classroom Ron had never entered before. A room with a plain door, no sign. McGonagall opened it. Inside was a mirror. Not a normal mirror. It was tall, ornate, gold-framed, standing alone in the room like a throne made of glass. Ron's scar pinched sharply. He flinched. Dumbledore watched him closely. "This," Dumbledore said softly, "is the Mirror of Erised." Ron stared at it. The air around it felt strange, like standing near deep water. What does it do? Ron asked, voice rough. Dumbledore's eyes were unreadable. It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. Ron laughed once, harsh. And you brought me here because your scar has reacted to certain places, Dumbledore said, calm and precise. And we need to understand what it is reacting to. Ron's mouth went dry. McGonagall's gaze sharpened. Look into it, Mr. Weasley. Ron hesitated. Something in him didn't want to. Then the tug tightened, like the scar itself wanted him to look. Ron stepped forward. He looked into the mirror. At first, he saw himself. Same hair, same freckles, same scar. Then the image shifted. Ron's breath caught. In the mirror, he wasn't in Hogwarts. He was standing in the Burrow. But it wasn't the Burrow he knew. It was bigger, cleaner, brighter. Like the world had decided the Weasleys deserved nice things because they'd produced a savior. His family was around him, all of them smiling. Molly's face was relaxed, eyes bright with pride instead of fear. Arthur looked calm, not constantly watching windows. Fred and George weren't joking to cover anxiety. They were just happy. Ginny was laughing. Ron's chest tightened. And then Ron saw something that made his stomach drop. In the mirror, Voldemort was there too. Not as a monster, not as a shadow, as a man, tall, pale, calm, standing behind Ron like a mentor. A hand resting lightly on Ron's shoulder like it belonged there. Ron's scar flared with icy pain. Ron stumbled backward, breathing hard. No, he whispered. Dumbledore's expression sharpened. What did you see? Ron shook his head violently. Nothing. I saw, just. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Mr. Weasley. Ron's throat tightened. I saw my family. Happy. Dumbledore studied him. Ron could tell he didn't believe that was all. Dumbledore stepped forward and looked into the mirror himself. Ron watched his face. For a second, Dumbledore's expression softened. Then it hardened again, like he'd seen something he couldn't afford to want. He stepped away. That is enough, Dumbledore said softly. McGonagall looked dissatisfied, but she didn't argue. Dumbledore turned to Ron. Mr. Weasley, he said gently, the mirror does not show truth. It shows desire, and desire can be dangerous. Ron's scar throbbed. Ron forced himself to meet Dumbledore's eyes. Why did I see? He stopped. He couldn't say Voldemort aloud, couldn't give the thought breath. Dumbledore's gaze flicked to his scar again. As I said, Dumbledore murmured, we must understand what remains tethered to you. They escorted Ron back to Gryffindor Tower. Ron's hands shook the whole way. The image of Voldemort's hand on his shoulder stayed burned into his mind like a brand. When he got back, Harry and Hermione were waiting by the fire, tense. Harry stood instantly. What did they do? Ron tried to laugh it off. Nothing. Just a mirror. Hermione frowned. A mirror? Ron nodded, swallowing hard. It shows you what you want most. Harry's eyes narrowed. And what did you see? Ron opened his mouth. He couldn't say it, so he lied. My family, he said. Hermione's gaze softened. That makes sense. Harry didn't look convinced. But Harry didn't push, because Harry knew what it was like to see something painful and not want to share it. That night, Ron lay awake again. He kept thinking about the mirror. He kept thinking about Voldemort standing behind him like he belonged. He kept thinking about the scar's tug, like it wanted Ron closer to something hidden. A week later, Harry disappeared. Not in the dramatic way stories liked. Not with screaming. Simply gone. Ron returned from dinner to find Harry's bed empty, and Hermione standing in the dormitory doorway, pale. He went out. She whispered. He said he heard something. Ron's stomach dropped. The hook in his scar tightened. It tugged hard toward the third-floor corridor. Ron's heart began to race. No. Hermione grabbed his arm. Ron! Ron shoved his feet into his shoes and ran. Hermione ran after him. The corridors were silent, moonlight slanting through windows. Ron's scar pulled like a leash. He didn't question it now. He knew where Harry had gone. They reached the third-floor corridor. The door was ajar. Warm dog breath seeped out. Ron's stomach churned. Hermione whispered, "Oh no." Ron pushed the door open. The three-headed dog was there, but it was asleep. Someone had played music. A harp sat near its paws, enchanting soft notes into the air. Harry stood by the trapdoor beneath the dog, face pale, eyes fixed downward. "Harry," Ron hissed. Harry spun, eyes wide. He looked guilty and determined at the same time. "I had to," Harry whispered. "I saw Snape. He was limping, and I heard him say something about the stone. Something's hidden here." Hermione's face went white. "The stone?" Harry nodded. "I think it's something Voldemort wants." Ron's scar pulsed painfully. Like it agreed. Ron swallowed hard. "Then we shouldn't be here." Harry's jaw tightened. "If it's Voldemort." Ron flinched. Harry continued anyway. "If it's him, we can't just wait. They keep secrets. They keep saying they'll protect us, but they keep pulling you into rooms with mirrors and telling you it's fine. What if it's not fine?" Ron stared at him. Harry's voice lowered. "What if they're wrong?" Hermione's breathing was fast. "We need to tell a teacher." Harry shook his head. "And wait, and let Snape take it. I don't trust him." Ron's stomach twisted. He didn't trust anyone either, but he trusted Harry, and he trusted Hermione, and his scar was pulling him downward like it wanted him to jump. Ron hated that. But he also knew something. If Harry went down alone, he might not come back. Ron stepped toward the trapdoor. Hermione grabbed his sleeve. "Ron, no." Ron looked at her, voice shaking. "I can't let him go alone." Harry's eyes softened. "We go together." Hermione swallowed hard, then nodded. "Fine. But we do it properly." They climbed down. The trapdoor closed above them like a lid. The air below was cold and smelled faintly of dust and magic. They fell, briefly, then landed on something soft. A plant. It wrapped around them instantly, thick vines tightening like snakes. Hermione squeaked, panic rising. "Devil's snare," she gasped. Ron's scar pulsed again. The vines tightened harder around his chest, and Ron felt a surge of fear so sharp it made his vision blur. Not his fear, someone else's. A memory of being trapped. A memory of drowning. Ron's scar screamed with ice-hot pain. Ron thrashed, heart hammering. Hermione's voice cut through the panic. "Stop moving. It tightens if you panic." Ron tried, but the fear wasn't obeying him. It surged again, alien and intense. Harry shouted, "Hermione, light." Hermione fumbled for her wand, trembling. Lumos solem. Light burst into the space like a miniature sun. The vines recoiled. They scrambled free, panting. Ron pressed his hand to his forehead, sweating. Hermione stared at him. "Ron, are you all right?" Ron forced a nod. "Fine," because the fear he'd felt hadn't been his, and it was getting stronger. They moved forward. The traps continued. Keys, brooms, a room of flying keys that sliced the air like metal birds. Harry caught the right one, hand bleeding, eyes determined. They passed through a door and entered a chessboard. Huge pieces. Stone. Silent. Ron's stomach dropped. He knew this was coming. He'd heard older students talk about it like it was a legend. But standing there, seeing the pieces towering over them, Ron understood. This wasn't a puzzle. It was a test, a question carved into stone. Who are you willing to sacrifice? Harry looked around, calculating. Hermione whispered, "We have to play." Ron stared at the board. In canon stories, Ron would sacrifice himself here for Harry. But Ron wasn't the side character in this world. Ron was the chosen one. The world expected him to go forward. It expected other people to fall for him. Ron's chest tightened. He hated that expectation more than anything. He took a step toward the board anyway because someone had to. Harry grabbed his arm. Ron froze. Harry's eyes were intense. "No," Harry whispered. Ron blinked. "What?" Harry swallowed. "This is the part where you go on and I—" Ron stared. Harry's voice cracked just slightly. "I'm not letting that happen." Ron's throat tightened. "Harry, you don't have to." "I do," Harry said fiercely. "You didn't ask for this. You didn't ask to be chosen. But they will still expect you to die for them if it comes to it. I'm not letting the story take you." Ron felt his scar pulse, as if something inside him was furious. Hermione's eyes widened. Harry stepped onto the board. Ron's breath caught. "No." Harry turned to him, eyes steady. "You said you didn't want to be their promise," Harry whispered. "So don't be. Let me choose." Then, "Let me choose." The words hit Ron like a spell, because Ron had never gotten to choose. Not the scar, not the prophecy, not the eyes. But Harry was choosing. Harry was choosing to step into danger for Ron, not because he was destined to, but because he wanted to. Harry positioned himself as a piece. He moved with a calm focus that made Ron's chest ache. Hermione joined too, trembling but determined. Ron tried to argue, tried to shove Harry off the board. Harry refused. "Ron," Harry said, voice low, "if you stop me, you're making the choice for me." Ron's hands shook. He hated this. He hated that the story was bending, that it was no longer predictable. But he also felt something else, something warm and painful, gratitude and fear. Because if Harry fell here, it would be Ron's fault. The chess game began. Pieces smashed into each other with the sound of cracking stone. Harry shouted moves. Hermione watched, eyes darting, lips moving. Ron stood frozen, heart pounding. Then it happened. A stone piece raised its weapon toward Ron's position. Harry saw it first. Harry's eyes widened. "No," Harry breathed. He moved, not strategically, instinctively. He stepped in front of the blow. Stone slammed into him. Harry was thrown backward, collapsing hard on the floor. Blood spread across his sleeve. Ron's vision went white. For a second, he didn't hear Hermione's scream. He didn't hear the stone pieces settling. All he heard was the roaring inside his own skull. Not pain, not fear. Rage. Alien rage. A cold, cruel satisfaction that was not his. Ron's scar flared with ice fire. Ron stumbled, gasping, clutching his forehead. And in that moment, Ron understood the terrifying truth. Something inside him liked seeing Harry fall. Ron forced himself forward, kneeling beside Harry. Harry's eyes fluttered. He whispered, "Go." Ron's throat tightened. "No." Harry's hand caught Ron's sleeve weakly. "Please, Ron. We have to." He said go. Ron's scar throbbed like a heartbeat. The tug pulled hard forward, deeper, toward the last chamber. Ron stood slowly, wand shaking. He looked at Harry, bleeding and pale, and felt guilt so heavy it made his chest hurt. He looked at Hermione, terrified but determined, and then he felt the tug again, like a hook in his scar, like a thread being pulled, like something down there was calling to the chosen one. Ron swallowed, voice low. If he dies, Hermione's voice broke. He won't, but he turned and walked forward anyway, because there was no choice now. Not his choice, the story's choice. They reached the final door. Hermione's hands shook as she solved the potion's logic, quick and brilliant even through tears. Ron drank the right potion, feeling fire slide down his throat. The air shimmered. Ron stepped through. The room beyond was quiet. Too quiet. A stone pedestal stood in the center. On it, a small, unremarkable package, the Sorcerer's Stone. Ron's scar screamed, his vision blurred. And then a voice spoke behind him. Soft, cold, familiar. Hello, Ronald Weasley. Ron turned slowly. Professor Quirrell stood there, smiling. And behind Quirrell's eyes, something older and darker looked out at Ron, like it had been waiting for him his whole life. Ron's first thought was that Quirrell looked wrong, not in the obvious way. He still had the twitchy shoulders, the nervous little flinch in his hands, the faint smell of garlic that clung to him like a nervous habit. But there was something else now, something that didn't fit the stuttering teacher persona Ron had seen in the Great Hall. His eyes were too steady, his smile was too calm, and the air in the room felt like it had just become heavier, as if the castle itself had pressed a palm down on Ron's chest. Ron's scar throbbed with icy rhythm. He forced his breathing to stay even. Behind him, the shimmer of the potion barrier faded, sealing him in. Hermione was on the other side. Harry was bleeding on the chessboard above. Ron was alone. That was how the story always tried to arrange it in the end. The chosen one, isolated, cornered, forced into the moment that would define him. Ron hated that more than he could explain. Quirrell stepped closer, hands clasped politely as if this were a normal after-class meeting. You're very brave, he said softly. Ron's fingers tightened around his wand. Where's Snape? Quirrell's smile widened a fraction. Severus? Oh, he's been very busy. Convinced he's saving the day, he rather enjoys that. Ron's stomach twisted. The room felt cold enough to frost breath. Yet Ron's skin was damp with sweat. What is this? Ron demanded. What are you doing? Quirrell's gaze slid to Ron's forehead. The scar. He looked at it like it was a keyhole. I'm here for the stone, Quirrell said simply. And you're here because you can't help yourself. Ron's scar pulsed harder. The tug was almost painful now, toward the pedestal. Ron's body wanted to move, not just wanted, needed. Ron planted his feet like nails. I'm not giving you anything, Ron said, voice shaking only slightly. Quirrell chuckled under his breath. You misunderstand. I don't need you to give it. I only need you to want it. Ron's stomach dropped. The Mirror of Erised, the deepest desire, Dumbledore's warning. Ron swallowed hard. You can't take it. Oh, Quirrell murmured, almost kindly. But I can. The mirror protects it from those who would use it. But the mirror also tempts. And you, Ronald Weasley, you are full of temptation. Ron's scar screamed in icy pain. Ron's vision flickered. For a heartbeat, the room shifted. Not physically. In his mind, he saw the Burrow again, bright and clean and safe. He saw Molly smiling without fear. He saw Arthur relaxed. He saw Ginny laughing. He saw his brothers older and alive, and whole, and unafraid. He saw himself standing tall, not as a boy carrying a prophecy, but as someone who had made everything better. Ron's throat tightened, because it wasn't just a picture, it was a hunger. a desperate, bone-deep desire to fix what war had broken. Quirrell stepped closer, voice low and coaxing. "You want peace," he whispered. "You want your mother to sleep through the night. You want your family to stop watching the windows. You want your scar to stop hurting." Ron clenched his jaw. Quirrell's eyes gleamed. "You want to be more than a symbol," Quirrell continued. "You want to be powerful enough to make them safe." Ron's wand hand trembled, because Quirrell was saying the things Ron never said out loud. Quirrell smiled softly. "And if you had the stone, you could. Just think. You could stop death. You could stop fear. You could stop being a child trapped in a story." Ron's scar pulsed so hard it felt like his skull might crack. Then Quirrell's hands moved. A wand flicked upward, quick as a snake's strike. Ron barely had time to raise his own wand before a force slammed into his chest. He flew backward, hitting the floor hard. The impact knocked the air out of him. His wand skittered away. Quirrell approached calmly, as if this was inevitable. Ron struggled to sit up, gasping. Quirrell crouched beside him and tilted Ron's chin upward with 2 fingers, like Ron was an object. "Look at you," Quirrell murmured. "So famous, so small." Ron spat at him. Quirrell leaned back easily, wiping his cheek with mild amusement. "Still fighting," he said. "Good. I prefer my chosen ones with a bit of fire." Ron's stomach turned. "Chosen ones," Ron rasped. Quirrell's eyes glittered. "You didn't think you were the first, did you?" Ron froze. Quirrell stood and walked toward the pedestal. The stone's package sat there, unassuming, but the air around it shimmered with old magic. Ron's scar tugged violently. Quirrell turned, eyes bright with satisfaction. "It's in the mirror," he said, almost to himself. "I can feel it, but I can't reach it." Ron swallowed hard. Quirrell's gaze locked on Ron again, calculating. "You can." Quirrell smiled. "You and I are going to have a conversation. Ronald Weasley. A conversation you've been avoiding your whole life." Ron's scar pulsed again, like a heartbeat sinking to something else. Quirrell lifted his hands and began unwrapping his turban. Ron's throat tightened. He'd heard rumors, stupid rumors, about Quirrell keeping garlic inside it, about him being odd, about him being cowardly. But Quirrell's hands moved with confidence now, steady and deliberate. The cloth fell away. Ron's breath caught. There was a face on the back of Quirrell's head. Pale, flattened, eyes red and wet like raw wounds. A mouth twisted into something that tried to be a smile. Voldemort. The room seemed to tilt. Ron's scar screamed. Pain exploded behind his eyes, icy and sharp, and for a second Ron couldn't tell where he ended and the scream began. The face blinked slowly. Then it spoke. Not in Quirrell's voice. In a voice that felt like cold metal pressed against skin. "Hello, Ronald." Ron tried to crawl backward. His body didn't obey. The pressure in his skull intensified, like someone was gripping the inside of his brain. Voldemort's red eyes fixed on Ron's scar. "My boy," Voldemort murmured. And the word was wrong, intimate, and possessive. "There you are." Ron's stomach lurched. "I'm not yours," Ron choked. Quirrell laughed softly, his own laughter mixed with Voldemort's. "Oh, you are," Quirrell said, "in a way." Voldemort's mouth curled. "You have no idea what you are," he whispered. "You think you are a miracle, a victory, a symbol of love." Ron's hands clenched into fists. Voldemort's gaze sharpened. "You are a door." Ron's breath hitched. The word hit him like a slap because it was the same word Draco had used. The same fear Molly had whispered without saying it. "Door." Voldemort's voice softened, almost pleased. The curse rebounded, he said, but it did not destroy me. It tore me, and the tear needed somewhere to hold. Ron's scar throbbed. Voldemort continued. A fragment of me latched onto the only thing close enough to anchor it. Ron's vision blurred. You, Voldemort breathed. Ron's throat went tight. No. Oh, yes, Voldemort murmured. I have been with you since you were an infant. I have watched you grow. I have tasted your fear. I have felt your anger. I have waited. Ron tried to stand. His knees trembled. Quirrell's hands tightened, magic pressing down like weight. Voldemort's eyes glittered. Do you know why your scar hurts near locked doors? He asked. Because I recognize my own work. I recognize the shape of secrets. Voldemort's voice lowered. And do you know why it hurt when you saved the girl from the troll? Ron's heart pounded. Voldemort smiled. Because for a moment, Voldemort whispered, you let me in. He remembered the rage, the cold satisfaction when Harry fell on the chessboard. He'd told himself it was shock. He'd told himself it was fear. But Voldemort was naming it, claiming it. Ron's hands shook. No, Ron whispered again, but it sounded weaker. Voldemort's gaze softened, almost compassionate, which was worse. You are tired, Voldemort murmured. So tired of carrying everyone's hope, so tired of being watched, so tired of being expected to be brave. Ron swallowed hard. Voldemort continued, voice gentle as poison. I can take that from you. Ron's scar pulsed. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. Give me the stone, he said softly, and I will give you a choice. Choice. The word stabbed Ron, because it was the thing he wanted most, the thing the world never gave him, the thing the Sorting Hat had dangled like a tease. Voldemort's voice turned sweet. You want your family safe, he murmured. You want your mother to sleep. You want your brothers to live. You want the war to stay dead. Ron's throat tightened. Voldemort leaned in as much as a face on the back of a head could. With the stone, Voldemort whispered, I can bring them peace. I can remove the fear. I can make the world quiet. Ron's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. He hated that part of him listened. He hated that part of him wanted it. He hated that the desire didn't make him evil. It made him human. Quirrell stepped closer again, smiling gently, as if comforting a child. Just look in the mirror, Quirrell murmured. Just let it show you what you want. Want it enough, and the stone will come to you. Then give it to us. That's all. Ron's fingers twitched. The pedestal waited. The air shimmered. Ron's scar tugged like a leash. Ron swallowed hard and took one step toward the mirror. Then he stopped, because he remembered Harry's voice on the chessboard. Let me choose. He remembered Harry stepping in front of the blow. He remembered Hermione lying for them without hesitation. He remembered Molly's promise. You are mine, not theirs. Ron looked at Quirrell, then at Voldemort's face, then down at his own hands. A thought rose slowly through the panic and pain. If Voldemort had been with him all his life, then Voldemort had been listening too, listening to Ron's fears, listening to his wants, using them as bait. Ron took another step towards the mirror. Quirrell's smile widened. Voldemort's eyes gleamed, hungry. Ron stared into the mirror. His reflection appeared. Then it changed. The Burrow. Bright, clean, safe. Molly laughing, unafraid. Arthur relaxed. Ginny smiling. Fred and George older and alive. Percy's face soft and loving instead of tight with judgment. Bill and Charlie home. The family whole. Ron's chest tightened so hard it hurt. And then, behind Ron in the mirror, Voldemort stood again, hand on Ron's shoulder, smiling like a proud father. Ron's scar screamed. Ron's stomach churned. For a second, Ron almost drowned in the desire, the desperate, aching want to make it true. He felt the stone's magic shift, responding. He felt something move inside him, like a lock clicking. Quirrell's voice whispered eagerly, "Yes, yes." Ron breathed in. And then Ron did something the story had never planned for. He wanted something else. Not power. Not glory. Not the world's applause. Ron wanted one simple, stubborn thing. He wanted Voldemort gone. Not hidden. Not delayed. Gone. And for the first time, Ron aimed his desire like a weapon. He stared into the mirror and imagined Voldemort's face dissolving into nothing. He imagined the thread snapping. He imagined the door sealing shut. Forever. He imagined quiet inside his skull. The mirror's surface rippled. Quirrell's smile faltered. Voldemort's eyes widened slightly. "What are you doing?" Voldemort hissed. Ron's scar burned with ice. Ron forced his voice out through the pain. "Choosing." Quirrell lifted his wand instantly, panicked now. "Stop." But it was too late. The stone slid into Ron's pocket, just like that. Not because Ron wanted to use it, because Ron wanted to keep it away. Quirrell froze, eyes wide. Voldemort's face twisted in rage. "Give it to me." Ron stepped backward, hand over his pocket, wand shaking but ready. "No," Ron rasped. "I won't." Quirrell lunged. Ron reacted without thinking. He grabbed Quirrell's arm. The moment his skin touched Quirrell's, pain exploded through Ron's scar. Not pain like before. This was different. Heat, sudden and fierce, racing through Ron's veins like fire. Quirrell screamed. His skin blistered under Ron's grip like it had touched acid. Quirrell jerked back, eyes wild with terror. He's burning me." Voldemort's face contorted. "Let go." Ron stumbled, shaking, staring at his own hand like he couldn't believe it. The fire in his veins faded, leaving a cold ache. Voldemort hissed, voice cracking with fury. "You lived because of love," he snarled. "Love leaves traces. But it should not be able to do this." Ron's breath came fast. He stared at his hand again. Love. Molly's love. Molly's stubborn, ferocious refusal to surrender him. Maybe that wasn't just protection. Maybe it was a weapon. Quirrell lunged again, desperate. Ron grabbed him again instinctively. Quirrell screamed louder. His hands smoked. Voldemort's red eyes widened in sudden fear. Not of Ron. Of the love magic he couldn't control. Ron's scar flared with pain. The pressure in Ron's skull intensified, Voldemort pushing against him, trying to force the door open. Ron's vision blurred. He heard Voldemort's voice in his head now. Not from Quirrell's mouth. "Give it to me. Give it to me. Give it to me." Ron stumbled, clutching his forehead, gasping. The door, the thread, the hook. It tightened. Ron felt something inside him strain, like a seam tearing. And in that moment, Ron understood the real danger. It wasn't Quirrell. It wasn't the stone. It was the fact that Voldemort could speak inside his mind, could push, could pry. Ron's knees hit the floor. Quirrell staggered back, shaking, hands blistered. Voldemort's face twisted in fury and desperation. "Kill him," Voldemort snarled at Quirrell. "Kill him now." Quirrell raised his wand, trembling. Ron looked up, eyes wide. Then the door behind Ron burst open. Light flooded the chamber. Dumbledore stepped in like a storm made human. "Enough," Dumbledore said softly. Quirrell froze. Voldemort's face went tight with hatred. Dumbledore. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to Ron on the floor. to the stone's magic shimmering faintly around him, to Quirrell's blistered hands. Understanding sharpened in Dumbledore's expression. "So," Dumbledore murmured, "it is true." Voldemort hissed, "He is mine." Dumbledore's voice went cold. "He is a child." Quirrell tried to move. Dumbledore lifted his wand. There was no dramatic spell name, just power. Quirrell screamed as invisible force seized him, pinning him to the wall like an insect. Voldemort's face twisted, trying to pull away, trying to flee. Dumbledore stepped closer, eyes blazing. "You have clung to life by hiding behind another," Dumbledore said softly. "But you will not take him." Voldemort's red eyes snapped to Ron, and Ron felt it, a final, desperate tug at the thread, a yank, like a hand trying to rip a door off its hinges. Ron screamed, clutching his scar. Dumbledore's wand flashed. The pressure eased suddenly, like a rope snapping. Ron gasped, collapsing forward. Quirrell convulsed. Voldemort's face contorted, mouth open in a silent shriek. Then it vanished, ripping away like smoke sucked into a vacuum. Quirrell fell limp. The room went quiet, except for Ron's ragged breathing. Dumbledore knelt beside Ron, gaze fixed on his scar. Ron's forehead throbbed, but the hook, the tug, felt weaker. Not gone, but weakened. Ron swallowed hard. He was, in my head. Dumbledore's expression tightened. "Yes," he said softly, "and tonight we learned something important." Ron's voice shook. "What?" Dumbledore's eyes met his. "Tonight," Dumbledore said, "you chose against him." Ron's throat tightened. Dumbledore continued, voice low. "That matters. More than you know." Ron stared down at his shaking hands. He had touched Quirrell and burned him. He had pulled the stone from the mirror by wanting it kept away. He had felt Voldemort's voice in his skull and refused it. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of a war inside himself. Dumbledore helped Ron to his feet. "Where's Harry?" Ron rasped immediately. Dumbledore's gaze softened. "Alive," he said. "Barely. Madame Pomfrey is with him." Ron's chest ached with relief so sharp it hurt. Hermione's voice echoed faintly from outside the chamber, frantic. "Ron. Harry." As they stepped out, Ron felt something shift again. Not the hook, something else. A quiet, cold realization settling in his bones. Voldemort had been with him since infancy, and Voldemort had just learned that Ron could fight him from the inside, which meant Voldemort would never stop trying. Not now. Not ever. Ron woke up in the hospital wing with sunlight on his face and a pain behind his eyes that felt like he'd swallowed a storm. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the smell hit him. Clean linen, potions, that sharp medicinal tang that always reminded him of crushed leaves and metal. He turned his head slowly. Harry was in the bed beside him, arm wrapped in bandages, face pale but breathing. Hermione was slumped in a chair between them, asleep with her head on her arms, hair spilling like a messy halo across the table. Ron's chest tightened. Alive. They were alive. That relief was so strong it almost made him laugh. Then the scar pulsed. Not with the old hook tug, not with the eager pull towards secrets. Just a dull ache, like a bruise that had stopped bleeding but still remembered the strike. Ron lifted his hand to his forehead cautiously. He expected the scar to burn, to scream, to throb with Voldemort's presence like it always had in those moments of danger. Instead, he felt quiet, not peace, but quiet. A silence that made Ron's skin prickle because he didn't trust it. He lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting the memory of the last night replay in jagged flashes. Quirrell's calm smile, the face on the back of his head, Voldemort's voice saying, "My boy," like he owned Ron. The mirror showing Voldemort's hand on Ron's shoulder, the stone sliding into Ron's pocket when Ron wanted it kept away, the burning on Quirrell's hands, Dumbledore arriving like a storm. And the moment the pressure in Ron's skull snapped, like a rope breaking, Ron swallowed hard. He'd always imagined victory would feel like fireworks. Instead, it felt like waking up and realizing the monster was still in the room, just quieter now, hiding behind the furniture. Hermione stirred, blinking awake. Her eyes snapped to Ron instantly. "You're awake," she breathed, voice hoarse from sleep. Harry's eyes fluttered too, and he turned his head slowly, as if it cost him everything. Ron tried to speak and found his throat dry. "Hi," he croaked. Hermione let out a shaky laugh that sounded too close to a sob. "You absolute." She stopped, swallowed hard, then leaned forward and grabbed Ron's hand so tightly it hurt. "You scared me." Ron looked at her, surprised by the rawness. He didn't know what to say, so he said the truth. "I scared me too." Harry's mouth twitched faintly. "You burned him," he whispered. Ron blinked. "What?" Harry's voice was weak, but steady. "I heard Pomfrey talking." She said Quirrell's hands looked like they'd been dipped in boiling water. Ron stared at his own hands, flexing his fingers like they belonged to someone else. Hermione's eyes flicked to Ron's forehead. "And your scar?" Ron hesitated. He didn't want to answer. But they'd been in it with him now. They'd seen too much. "It's quieter," Ron admitted. Like something's been pulled back." Hermione's face tightened. "But not gone. No." Harry's gaze sharpened. "He was in you." Ron flinched at the bluntness, but he nodded. "A piece. Dumbledore called it a remnant." Hermione swallowed. "So, that means—" Ron looked away. "It means I didn't beat him," Ron muttered bitterly. "I just survived him." And he latched on. Harry's voice was soft. "That's not your fault." Ron snapped. "Isn't it? Everyone's been calling me a miracle for years, and I'm not. I'm a mistake." Hermione's grip tightened. "Don't." He remembered Voldemort's eyes, hungry and pleased. He remembered the cold satisfaction when Harry fell on the chessboard. He remembered the rage that hadn't felt like his own. Ron swallowed hard. "Sometimes," he whispered, barely able to say it, "I can feel him. Like a shadow behind my thoughts." Hermione went pale. Harry didn't look away. Harry's voice stayed steady even though his hand trembled slightly in the sheets. "Then we fight him," Harry said simply. Ron laughed, sharp and bitter. "How?" "He's in my head." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Then we fight him there too." Ron stared at Harry. Something in Ron's chest shifted. Because Harry wasn't saying it like a hero. Harry was saying it like a friend. Not destiny. Choice. Footsteps approached. Madame Pomfrey bustled in, muttering about reckless children, waving her wand at them and fussing with blankets. Behind her came Dumbledore. The room seemed to hold its breath. Dumbledore's gaze swept over them, pausing on Ron's face. "Good morning," Dumbledore said gently. Ron's throat tightened. Hermione sat up straighter, instantly alert. Harry's eyes watched Dumbledore like he didn't trust him fully. Not after how easily adults had tried to manage Ron's life. Dumbledore came closer and pulled a chair to Ron's bedside. Madame Pomfrey huffed, but didn't argue, as if she knew there were conversations that potions couldn't fix. Dumbledore looked at Ron's scar for a long moment. Then he said softly, "How do you feel?" Ron wanted to say, "Fine." Ron wanted to say nothing. Ron wanted to be ordinary enough to answer like, any other kid. Instead, he said, like someone's been using my skull as a house. Hermione made a small sound. Dumbledore nodded slowly, as if Ron had confirmed a suspicion rather than shocked him. Yes, Dumbledore murmured. That is accurate. Ron's hands clenched under the blanket. So what now? Ron demanded. Do you lock me up? Do you send me somewhere safe? Do you decide I'm too dangerous to be around other students? Dumbledore's eyes softened, but his voice stayed honest. There will be people who suggest it, he said. Ron's stomach dropped. Hermione's face tightened. That's horrible. Dumbledore didn't deny it. Fear makes people cruel, he said quietly, and fear of what is inside you will be tempting. Ron's scar ached. Then what? Ron whispered. Dumbledore's gaze held his. Then we tell the truth, he said. Ron blinked. You mean you tell the truth? Dumbledore's mouth tightened. Yes. Harry's eyes narrowed. To who? Dumbledore's voice stayed calm. To you, he said, and his gaze shifted to Hermione and Harry too, to those who must understand. Ron swallowed hard. I already understand. I'm a door. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. No, he said softly. You are not a door. Ron stared. Dumbledore continued, precise now. A door can be opened by anyone with the key. A door is passive. Ron's scar throbbed faintly. You, Dumbledore said, are a battleground. Silence dropped like stone. Hermione's face went pale. Harry's jaw tightened. Ron's chest tightened so hard he thought it might crack. Dumbledore's voice was quiet but relentless. Voldemort's curse did not simply leave a scar. It left a fragment of his soul tethered to you. That fragment has been feeding on fear and anger, trying to carve space inside you. Ron swallowed hard. So you are yourself, Dumbledore interrupted gently. And you proved it last night. Ron's breath shook. By accident, Dumbledore's gaze held his. By choice, he corrected. Ron looked away, blinking hard. Dumbledore's voice softened. The mirror gave you temptation, he said. It offered you comfort, safety, power. Ron's mind flashed again to the burrow bright and safe. Dumbledore continued. And you wanted something else. You wanted to stop him. Not to use the stone, not to save yourself, but to deny him. Ron's throat tightened. I didn't want him behind me, Ron whispered. I didn't want his hand on my shoulder. Dumbledore nodded. Exactly. Hermione's voice trembled. So, he can't control Ron. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to her. Not while Ronald chooses himself. Ron swallowed. Harry's voice was low. But he can try. Dumbledore didn't deny it. Yes. Ron's hands clenched. So what do we do? Dumbledore exhaled slowly. We prepare, he said. Not just for Voldemort's return, for what his return will mean, now that we know his fragment is tethered to you. Ron's stomach dropped. You think he'll come back? Dumbledore's eyes were steady. He will try, he said. He has already tried, tonight, through another body. That is not the act of a man who has accepted defeat. Ron felt cold spread through his chest. Dumbledore leaned closer slightly. But the story has changed, he said softly. Ron frowned. How? Dumbledore's gaze shifted briefly to Harry. Because, Dumbledore said, you were not meant to resist him this early. Ron's scar pulsed faintly. Dumbledore's voice remained calm. You were meant to be a symbol, a child raised under the weight of expectation, until the day Voldemort returned to claim what he believes is his. Hermione's face went white. That's sick. Dumbledore didn't disagree. Yes, he said. But it is also why last night mattered. Voldemort now knows you can fight him from within. Ron swallowed. So he'll come for me. Dumbledore nodded. He will. Ron's stomach churned. Harry's voice cut through, sharp. Then we keep Ron safe. Dumbledore's eyes softened toward Harry. Safety is not a place, he said quietly. It is a strategy. Ron's throat tightened again. And what about me? He demanded. Do I just live with him in my head forever? Dumbledore's gaze steadied. No, he said softly. There are ways. Hermione leaned forward eagerly despite her fear. What ways? Dumbledore's expression grew careful. Legilimency, occlumency, ancient protections. There may even be a method to sever the tether entirely. Ron's heart pounded. Sever it. Dumbledore nodded. But it will not be simple, he said. And it will require something rare. Ron swallowed. What? Dumbledore looked at him with a gaze that was gentle and terrible. It will require you to become stronger than the thing inside you, he said. Ron's stomach twisted. Hermione whispered, We'll help. We will. Dumbledore's gaze flicked to them, and for a moment, Ron saw something like gratitude in it. But then Dumbledore's face hardened again, because gratitude didn't change the stakes. There is another complication, Dumbledore said. Ron's chest tightened. Of course there is. Dumbledore's eyes flicked toward the window, as if checking the world outside. The prophecy, Dumbledore said softly. Ron froze. He'd heard whispers about it his whole life. Adults turning quiet. Molly's anger whenever someone even hinted at destiny. But no one had ever said the word directly to Ron like that. Ron swallowed. There's a prophecy about me. Dumbledore nodded once. Yes. Hermione's voice shook. What does it say? Dumbledore hesitated. Ron's hands clenched. Tell me. Dumbledore's gaze met his, and then he spoke. The prophecy says that the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. Dumbledore said quietly, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. Ron felt sick, marked him as his equal. The scar throbbed. Dumbledore continued, voice steady. You were marked, Ronald, but last night something shifted. What? Dumbledore's eyes went to Harry again. Because when Voldemort attempted to use you, Dumbledore said, you resisted. And when the stone was in play, Voldemort's attention did what it always does. Ron's breath hitched. It sought the path of least resistance. Dumbledore murmured. Hermione's eyes widened. You mean? Dumbledore nodded. When Voldemort was forced to retreat, Dumbledore said, he did not flee from you alone. He fled from the love magic that burned Quirrell. He fled from the resistance within you. Ron's scar ached, dull and angry. And in that moment, Dumbledore said quietly, his attention shifted to the one who stood beside you without being protected by legend. Ron's stomach dropped. Harry's face went pale. Ron whispered, Harry. Harry didn't look away this time. Harry's eyes were steady, but Ron saw something in them, an old, familiar resignation, like Harry had always expected danger to find him eventually. Hermione's voice broke. So Voldemort will target Harry, too. Dumbledore's eyes were sorrowful. He already has, he said softly. He always did, in a way. Not because of prophecy in this world, but because Harry Potter is vulnerable to the same cruelty that created you, a child caught in a war he didn't choose. Ron's chest tightened so hard he thought he might be sick. He'd spent his life envying Harry's invisibility. Now invisibility was turning into a target. Ron's voice shook. "It's my fault." Harry's voice was sharp despite his weakness. "No." Ron's eyes burned. "He was supposed to go after me. I was the chosen one. I was the one." Harry's gaze locked on him. "You didn't choose this," Harry said. "Stop acting like you did." Ron swallowed hard. Dumbledore watched them carefully. Then he said softly, "This is why the story has changed. Voldemort believed you would be a door, a possession, a prize. Last night you proved you are neither." Ron's scar throbbed faintly, like it resented that. Dumbledore continued, "But he will not accept that. He will attempt to break you, to isolate you, to make you doubt yourself until the fragment has space again." Ron felt cold in his chest. Hermione's voice was firm, trembling but fierce. "Then we don't let him isolate Ron." Harry nodded. "We don't." Dumbledore's gaze softened. "Good," he murmured, "because the only reason Voldemort's fragment has not swallowed you already is because you are not alone." Ron's throat tightened. Dumbledore stood, robe sweeping lightly. "I will not tell the Ministry the full truth," Dumbledore said quietly. "Not yet. They would call you dangerous. They would attempt to control you. And control is Voldemort's favorite tool." Ron's stomach twisted, relief and fear mixing. "But I will watch," Dumbledore added. "Closely." "Great." Dumbledore's mouth twitched faintly, almost a smile. "Yes," he said. "Great indeed." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Ronald," Dumbledore said softly. Ron's heart pounded. "What?" Dumbledore's eyes met his. "When you felt satisfaction as Harry fell on the chessboard," he said quietly, "that was not you." Ron froze. Hermione sucked in a breath. Harry's gaze tightened. Ron's stomach dropped, shame flooding him. Dumbledore continued, voice gentle but unyielding. "It will try again," he said. "It will try to make you think every dark thought is yours. It will try to make you believe you are tainted beyond repair." Ron's throat tightened. "What if I am?" Dumbledore's gaze was steady. "Then you would not be asking that question," he said simply. Silence. Dumbledore turned and left. Madame Pomfrey shooed Hermione toward breakfast and scolded Harry for trying to sit up. But Ron lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the dull ache in his scar, like a quiet warning. The year ended faster than Ron expected. Classes, snow, spring, exams, the steady return of normal rhythms. But nothing was normal anymore, because Ron now knew what he was. Not a miracle, not a legend, not a door. A battleground, and battlegrounds didn't get peace. They got strategies. They got allies. They got enemies learning their weak spots. On the Hogwarts Express home, Ron sat with Harry and Hermione and watched the countryside blur past. Students still whispered about him, still stared, still treated him like the chosen one. But something had changed in Ron. He didn't feel like a promise anymore. He felt like a person who had survived a fight inside his own skull and would have to keep fighting. Harry leaned back, eyes half closed, looking almost peaceful for once. Hermione read a book, but kept glancing at Ron like she was counting his breaths. Ron stared at the reflection in the window and saw his scar overlaid on the moving world. And for the first time, Ron didn't wonder why he'd survived. He wondered what he was supposed to do with survival. Because if Voldemort returned, he wouldn't just bring war. He would bring a war that lived inside the Chosen One. And Ron Weasley, 11 years old, understood something terrifyingly adult. The prophecy didn't make you heroic. It just made you a battlefield everyone wanted to win. But Ron had one thing Voldemort didn't understand. Ron had people. And Ron had the one power that had already broken the story once. Choice. End.